Okay, so good morning, everybody. Thank you. Okay, there's one person so weak and one person thinks it's a decent morning, so that's fantastic. You're in for an amazing session. I don't want to take any time away from our speaker except to say that Rabbi Dr. Jason Weiner is an amazing rabbi and teacher. You may know him through his work as a senior rabbi and executive director of spiritual care at Cedar Sinai. He writes books, he writes articles. He has an amazing amount to teach us about a million topics. That's all I'm going to say because he's going to give us some wonderful words of Torah right now. So without any further ado, Jason.
Thank you. Hello. Hi. Here, I have sources. I brought my own. So here, let's split them in half. Thank you. It's just one page. And I thought what we would talk about today is names. Do this. I don't know if I need this microphone. In fact, maybe I'll stand up here. Thought we'll talk about names, the importance of names, significance of names, and a few rituals that are related that we do in the hospital, and then how that's also actually very relevant for the high holidays, and some stories and anecdotes about how we've used this and how I think it could be useful in the high holidays. The names, I always think about, one of my favorite stories in the Gemara, when I think about the importance of names, is the story of Kedor. The story went as follows. There was a group of rabbis traveling through the wilderness, and they need to stop at an inn one night. So for them, the inn was, like some tents or something, right? So they stop, and the innkeeper says to them, "Here, give me your bags, and I'll show you to your room, to your tent." So one of the rabbis says, "Sure, no problem. What was your name?" So he says, "Kedor, nice to meet you." So he says, "Okay, it's fine. I'll keep my own bags." So the rabbis say, "Well, what's wrong with you? Just trust him." So he says, "Not with a name like Kedor. I'm not trusting him." So they're like, "Okay." So then the story goes, the next morning they wake up, all the bags are stolen except for the rabbi that kept his bags with him. They say, "How did you know?" So he said, "Kedor." Because in the generation of the flood, it says, Ki dor tafuchot hema. They were thieves then, and his name was too similar to a name that symbolizes thievery, so I knew he'd be a thief. That's the story of the Gemara. The idea of the story is that our name has an impact on us, on who we are. The word name, right? Neshama, comes from the shame, neshama. Or sham, it's our destination, where our dreams and our desires for our children, what we name them. But there's so much behind the names that we choose. In fact, so much so, I'm sure many of you are aware of people not telling anyone the name before the child's born. And I saw an interesting source that argued that the reason we don't tell anyone the names of children before they are formally named, and this is a big deal in the hospital all the time, people don't want to tell the people, come around asking for your child's name before you check out, is because there was a concern, what if you tell someone the name before it's official, and they make a little bit of a face? Oh, 7? You're going to name your kid 7? For the Seinfeld fans. And you're like, oh shoot, maybe I shouldn't name that.
7 of 9 for the Star Trek Next Generation.
Right, yes, very good. So you might think to yourself, oh, they made a face a little bit, maybe I shouldn't name my kid that. And the rabbis wanted you to be confident in the name you choose because they believed that it was somehow prophetically inspired. But can we change our names? Can we decide, I don't want to keep that name? And what does that mean when we make that decision? And many of us know, Rabbi Feinstein just spoke about it, the famous prayer that we say so many times, Uteshuva, Utefila, Utzedaka, Ma'avir Torah, Gezerah, the 3 things that change our Gezerah, our repentance and prayer and tzedakah. But the Gemara, and so here you have the sheets that I passed out. I'm sure there's plenty, there's a lot, there's more there. So that is based on a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, Daf Tes Zayin, page 16b. But look what the Gemara there adds something else that we don't usually quote. It's not part of the high holiday prayers, but it's totally relevant. So the Gemara says as follows: Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Arba devarim mikrayin gzar dino shel adam. 4 things. We always say it's 3, right? The 3 things. but maybe it's 4. What could they be? Tzedakah, that's in our prayers. Tza'aka, that's tefillah, calling out. Shinui Hashem, changing the name. Vishinui Maisa, and changing your actions. That's tshuva. So it's the 3 things that we always say in part of our high holiday prayers, but then there's another thing added in, all of a sudden, of changing our names. Could go around our synagogues and change everyone's names on the high holidays. How do we know Shinui Hashem? Because of Sarah. Sarai ishtecha lo tikra et shema Sarai. We're not going to call her Sarai anymore. Ki Sarah Shema. Now her name will be Sarah. Uksiv, and then it says afterwards, Ubirchasi ota, and I will bless you, v'gam nesati mimena lacha ben. And I will now give you a son. She'll now have a child because she has a new name. She's like a new person. V'yesh omrim, and some people add a 5th thing, af shinui makom. So the Gemara gives us this idea that on Rosh Hashanah, on the high holidays, whenever it is, might not be just high holidays, as we'll discuss, that one of the methods of tshuva, one of the methods of repentance, of changing ourselves, is changing our names. So there's a lot to say about this, and I want to discuss also. I don't want to just lecture at you, but I want to share with you a few sources that discuss this and bring up some fascinating theories and perspectives, and then also hear your thoughts, and I'll share with you a couple stories from my experience in the hospital. There was actually an interesting, this is talking about changing the name completely. I mean, Sarai to Sarah, what isn't such a complete name, but it is a new name. Avram to Avraham. Yaakov to Yisrael, that was a complete new name, right? So sometimes they're like changing the name slightly, sometimes it's a totally new name. The Sefer Hasidim writes as follows. This is fascinating. He says, Im nigzar al ploni sheshmo kach, let's say someone has a name, and there is a decree that such and such will happen to them in the coming year, right? We believe Rosh Hashanah, the Gezerah, all the decrees for the coming year will happen, and their Gezerah is such and such. Harei higia ad shari mavis. It could be even that they're up to the gates of death, that could be what's happening to them. V'korin lo shem shinui v'chai. Just change their name, and they could live. That's enough. That's powerful enough to change the Gezerah, so to speak. Kmo Yulad ben Naami, like when it says that Naami in the end of Book of Ruth had a son. Actually, Naami didn't have a son. It was Ruth, who ben Rus. Kagon Ruvain sheyesh lo ben. So what does this mean? Let's say someone named Ruvain has a son. So what will that person's name be? Let's say his name is Avraham. So his Hebrew name will be Avraham ben Ruvain. That's his name. But let's say Ruvain has this child, V'notalamus, but that child is dying, God forbid. V'yavo Shimon v'yomer l'Aviv. So Shimon comes to Reuven and says, "Hey Reuven," or to his mother, Aviv l'imo, to his mother or father, and says, "Ploni u'plonit, halachem shekel, halachem kikar. Here, I'm going to give you this money. I'm going to give you this bread, ubasar v'yayin, or this meat and wine, whatever it is. Ani podeh b'nechem. I'm going to purchase your child." So, metaphorically, I'm not going to keep him or her, but I'm going to purchase them. Podiat benechem she beni b'yichid. Then they will be my child. Why? Because now it will be Avram, not ben Ruvain, but Avram ben Shimon. They'll now have a new name because they have a new Hebrew name. Kach osim lemi she'ein mitkayimim lo banim. They also would do this, he argues, for someone who's struggling with fertility struggles. Which, by the way, makes sense because that was Sarah. Sarai was struggling with fertility, and when she changed her name to Sarah, that seemed to have an impact. And by the way, they argue that, have you heard of the Hebrew name Meshulam? Meshulam means Mishalem, to be sold. They argue sometimes they would change someone's name who was sold to Meshulam, because now they're sold. Or Chalafta. You heard in the Gemara in Aramaic that people named Bar Chalafta. Chalafta in Aramaic means to be traded or sold. Exchange, exactly. So that if someone's name was changed or they were bought, that's how they were now, the symbolism is the angel of death comes looking for, Avram ben Ruvain, and it's like, oh, where's Avram ben Ruvain? I can't find him. Are you Avram ben Ruvain? No, I'm Avram ben Shimon. Oh, I guess you're not Avram ben Ruvain. Okay, never mind, I can't find him. So then he leaves you alone. But maybe it's deeper, as hopefully we'll discuss. Yeah.
Is that the core of at least the first two sources, that we're confounding Satan or somehow? Or
Not necessarily. I'm just saying the Sefer Hasidim seems to imply that, but I don't personally think that that's what it means at all. But there are sources that actually argue that that's what's happening. You're confusing the Satan or something. But I think it's much deeper. But yeah. But actually, we do this a lot in the hospital. You might be familiar. I'm sure some of you have done this in your synagogues, where you do a name-changing ceremony for someone who's sick. This is straight in the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch writes as follows, in the Ramah, in the third source here. Yesh omrim, shemishi yesh lo chola bebeito, someone has an ill person in their family, yelach etzel chacham shebe'ir. Go to the wise person in the city. The idea of the wise person is that to change someone's name requires, if we have Ruach HaKodesh, prophecy, when we choose a child's name, like our own child, because something comes to you that makes you feel that this is the right name. So how can someone else just name a child if they're not? But maybe the idea is, at least the commentaries argue, the wise person has some kind of a spiritual connection that they have the ability. Although, by the way, the Sefer Hasidim there writes, some people would just, if they change the name, they would just open a chumash, and the first name that they pick is the name they choose. Actually, one time I got a call in the hospital. This is a common call that someone's parents are naming a child. They want the rabbi to help. So I went up there to help them. They said, here's the thing, Rabbi, we need a name with a Hebrew name that starts with a K. We can't think of a Hebrew name with a K. And I was like, oh, it's funny because this week's Parsha is Korach. And their eyes lit up. And I said, no, but you're not going to name it Korach. And they said, wait a second, that's this week's Parsha? I said, yeah, but he's a bad guy. And they're like, but what are the chances? We need a K and it's this week's Parsha. I was like, please, don't name him Korach. And they were like, we got to think about this. It's possible that there's a kid in LA somewhere named Korach. If he comes to one of your synagogues for his bar mitzvah and they tell you that the rabbi at the hospital named him Korach, please, I told them not to do it, but there might be out there. But anyways, so the idea is you go to the rabbi or someone who that was the idea of this Shulchan Aruch. You go to someone that has the power to think of what the name could be. V'yavakesh alav rachmim, and asks for mercy. V'chein noagu levarech cholim b'beit HaKnesset, and also there's the Misha Berach in synagogue. Likra lahem shem chadash, to give them a new name. Ki shinui hashem kore gazar dino. A new name can break the evil decree. And oftentimes the names when it's someone sick is something that implies healing, like Chava or Raphael or Alter or Alta or something like that. So this is the idea, and this is the concept and the tradition of changing a name that has to do with both for a sick person or for repentance. In fact, in most madrich, in rabbinic manuals, I've just noticed this, I don't know if this it seems intentional, it seems to make sense. If you look in the rabbinic life cycle guidebooks, they often put the deathbed vidui and the Shinui Hashem ceremony, the changing the name ceremony, together. Which on the one hand, it's like, gosh, they're assuming they're going to die. On the other hand, they both are similar, because the vidui is all about repentance and hopeful recovery. And changing the name is also like, things are bad, but we're hoping they're going to get better. Sometimes we think about these things, these traditions, and I gave the example of, maybe the person has a name and the angel of death is coming to look for that person, and the angel of death isn't that smart, and they can't find them if they don't have that name. And a little bit, it's like, is that really what it means? Because it's a little bit ridiculous. But sometimes we think about our traditions, and we think, imagine how we look to other people, when the nurse walks in the room and the patient's wearing tefillin and mumbling and can't respond, or on Sukkot and they're shaking a lulav or something. Sometimes we do things that seem strange. And sometimes, it's not just us. So did any of you read the book, The Spirit Catches You and Then You Fall Down? It's a great book. It's a novel, a true story. I actually read it when I was doing my doctorate in clinical bioethics. It was actually an assigned textbook, even though it's a novel. But it's a true story. It was written in 1997 about a Hmong refugee family. These are refugees from China who came to Central California, actually. They came to Fresno and Merced, and they came with lots of unique traditions. In fact, they sacrifice animals in their backyards illegally. They have all kinds of interesting traditions. And the story is about, there's a young girl who has horrible illness, and the family has all their ancient traditions, and the hospital can't understand them, and it kind of makes fun of them and ridicules them. So we read this book. It's about cultural competency and understanding different perspectives and different cultures and different people, and being respectful, because they weren't always treated respectfully because their traditions were seen as so strange and weird. And when I was reading this book, look at this on page 111. it says as follows. Finally, she and Neokau tried changing Leah's name to Ko. Leah was the character in the book, the main character, the young girl who was sick. A last-ditch Hamam remedy based on the premise that if a patient is called a new name, the evil spirit, who stole her soul, will be tricked into thinking that she is someone else, and the soul can return. According to Fawa, this plan was spoiled because Leah's doctors persisted in calling her Leah, thus ruining the subterfuge.
Oh my gosh.
So if the doctors only would have called her by her new name, she would have been fine. But when I read this, I was like, wow, it's not just us, right? This is an ancient thing. This is a thing. Like, people have this custom, and there might be some spiritual wisdom here. And just like the doctors at that hospital in Fresno, like, made fun of them and was like, no, her name is Leah. We don't just change her name. That's her name. And the family's like, no, we have to. And the doctors were like, no, we're not. And we think about, like, well, maybe there was something deeper there. Maybe there are things that we do. Also, there's value in them, and sometimes we get ridiculed by our traditions, or maybe we don't get ridiculed because we're just embarrassed, and so we don't do them. So, like, maybe there's something there. So I want to share with you a few insights, and then I really want to hear your reactions and discuss. So, first of all, there's just Avadia Yosef has a fascinating tshuva that he wrote about this topic. When I read it, I thought, this is so interesting. So I'm going to read to you. I just pick out the underlying pieces here because he quotes so many sources it just becomes burdensome. So just the basic points here is that he's arguing that this is going back to a spiritual, similar to Leah's family here, and the way I initially explained it, like the name change, something is spiritually happening when we name a child, but also when we change our names. So he writes here, Rabbi just say from the bottom, page 1 here, he says, because you notice, well, let's read it. She'ein la'kor legamre shem harishon mimakom. When we change a name, we shouldn't actually totally uproot the new name. The custom has become, as I mentioned before, to add a name, not to change the name. Even though it seems to imply in the Gemara and previous sources you're actually changing the name. But he's saying, no, you should add a name. Why? Umashanogu achshav, in the second underline there, rak lahosif shem b'zman choliav, that nowadays the reason we only add a name, first of all, we don't want to uproot that initial name which had holiness, especially it was given by the parents. There's something spiritually insightful with the original name. So we don't want to get rid of that. Also, I mean, just thinking about personally, like, I struggle a lot. I mean, I sometimes am embarrassed, just be totally honest, with the name Jason as a rabbi. Some people that I meet, sometimes say to me, like, your name's Jason? What kind of a name is that for a rabbi? In fact, actually, I remember when I was at Hebrew U, I don't know if some of you studied there maybe, I did my junior year at Hebrew U. I remember a class I took on Second Temple Judaism, and the professor, she was like, your name can't be Jason, what's your Jewish name? And I was like, well, Yehuda Leib, but my name is Jason. She was like, no student of mine will be named Jason. Jason was apparently an evil Cohen Gadol at the time of the Hellenistic period, and he was trying to undermine Judaism, and he was Greek, and she was like, no, Jason's an evil name. No Jew can be named Jason. So I'm sometimes embarrassed. One of the reasons why I still go by Jason, first of all, it's my whole life. It's just not easy to change a name. And also, I always felt bad that it's like spitting in my parents' face a little bit. And once I even said it to my mom, and she kind of agreed. I was like, no, I don't change my name. I think it would be insulting to you. And she was like, yeah, it would. So I was like, oh, I was hoping you were going to say like, so it's hard. So anyways, there's that, right? The whole aspect. But what about adding it? It'd be weird also to go like Jason Yehuda. I don't know, it just sounds funny. But anyways, that's one point. So he says, so what do we do today? We don't completely change the name. Kanoda, as is written in the Aryeh, the writings of the Aryeh, Asher Nefesh Chaya Hu Shmo. Our soul is bound up in our name. Something about our name is connected to our soul. V'chol adam shoev chiyuto al yedei osios shmo. And somehow our life force is drawn down from heaven, whatever this means, through the letters of our names. V'im okrin shmo legamre chas v'shalom paske l'chiyute. If we completely get rid of our name, you never know what can happen. Our whole life could be lost. U'lachein ein la'kor Hashem ela lahosif shem chadash. So he argues you shouldn't uproot the name, you should add a new name. Or, I mean, theoretically, changing a name slightly within the same name, like Avram to Avram isn't changing the name completely. That could be another option. But this is what he's arguing. You know, some people don't like to marry the same name as their father-in-law or mother-in-law or whatever. So sometimes there was a custom, apparently, that people would add a name if my wife's father was named Jason, so that I would be, then maybe it would be right. I have a friend who did that, actually. So that's what he argues. No, his name wasn't Jason, but of course not. He was Jewish. So, and then he says, "V'ayin b'shar ha'gilgulim." And look at what he says in the book of reincarnation. Ki kishenolad adam, when a person is born, v'avi v'imo korin lo shema ha'ola b'daitam. And when the parents choose a name that comes to their mind, eno ba'akrai v'yizdam. It's not just by chance. Kasher yalav hamazleg. It just doesn't just come by chance. Like Kadosh Baruch Hu sam b'fiyam Hashem ahu hamuchrach el neshamahi. That God gives them the name that they should choose for that child. So he argues we should actually add a name. And we can turn the page now. The custom is, we won't read every source here, but the Gesher Chaim writes, the new name is added first, traditionally. So for a sick person, oftentimes they often add the name like Chaim. So if someone's name was, I gave that example before, Ruvain, so it would become like Chaim Ruvain or something like that, to add the name at the beginning. And for a sick person, the way it works halachically is that if they survive for 30 days or more, the name remains. But if, God forbid, they don't make it for 30 days or more, they don't add that name like on the gravestone, things like that. That's the halachic. You know, people can take different things, but that's what he argues.
So the magic doesn't work.
It didn't work, so it doesn't stick.
Okay, I don't know why I'm questioning that.
That's how the halacha. But I mean, and of course, in the Gesher Chaim. But of course, there's different perspectives and different options. But that's what he argues. So, just to start to get to some of the specific points that I want to make and some of the perspectives, and then to open it up also, there's an interesting, this is a book called Masoras Moshe that I quoted here, the teachings of Rabbi Moshe Feinstein that weren't published before, but the students published. Because the question becomes, how often should we change names? I listened recently to a lecture that my predecessor, Rabbi Levi Meir, blessed memory, gave in 1994, actually, about this topic. I'll quote him again in a minute. It was a lecture on Lech Lecha, on Parshat Lech Lecha, about Avram's name change. He said there that he would change in the hospital patients' names about once a week. He's like, God, this is something I do constantly, changing names. I have been working at Cedar Sinai for 16 years. I've done it like 5 or 6 times. Maybe I'm wrong. When I heard that, I was like, wow, maybe I should be doing this more. I asked a few rabbis, and they were like, we do it like once a year, twice. So the question is like, and now we're talking about for a sick person. We'll talk in a minute. It's not just obviously for people who are physically ill. It could be for all kinds of life circumstances. But what's that like? How do you know, like, when is someone sick enough that this is right? Because it can also be scary. If you know that, like, we never do this unless it's really bad, and then you tell someone, oh, we're changing your name, that could also be scary, right? So, like, so he writes here something fascinating. He says here in the second source on page 2 on the top, he says, Sha'al Rabbeinu im kedai lahosif shem lechamoto shema'od chola. Someone wanted to change the name of someone who was very, very sick. Ukimat ein tekva, who almost had no hope of recovery. V'heshiv Rabbeinu she'ein tov lahosif shem lemisha chas v'shalom kimat begeder shel goseks. If someone is in the dying process, maybe it's not right to change their name. Why? Why? Because it's so late? Maybe because if there's no chance or likely chance of recovery, shebeteva ein harbe tikva shitrapeh. There's no strong likelihood that they'll recover. Shebevada yesh inyan b'shinu Hashem. Even though there is something to be said for this concept of changing a name, it doesn't really always work if we're trying to actually create physical healing, right? What if it doesn't work and people are like really excited about it? Then people are going to say, wait a second, the rabbis said to change the name and you lived. We changed the name and they died. I don't believe in the rabbis anymore. So he said, maybe we should be judicious about how we apply this and when we do this, which is an interesting perspective. In fact, by the way, can the name change work? Let's say we all just decide, or you decide in your synagogue, there's someone in the hospital, let's just change their name privately, and that will have some kind of spiritual impact on them in the hospital. We don't need to tell them because maybe they're not alert, or maybe they don't know about it. Like, does that make sense? So halachically, we don't need to read all the sources, but the second to last source I put, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was asked this question, and he said, no, halachically it doesn't work. You can't change a name unless the person knows the name is being changed, which starts to get at the core of why we are changing a name. And the truth is, I mean, because they have, the idea is they have to be sick enough that it's serious, because we don't want to just uproot old names. We've just learned that the person's name is being drawn through, their life source is drawn through their name. On the other hand, it could work to save someone, so we want to save lives, but we don't want to ruin their faith in God. There could be lots of challenges. Yeah.
But if you're saying a Misha Berach for the Cholim in the Shul, and a good chance the Cholev is not aware of that. So if they're not aware, it has no consequence.
Well, maybe Misha Berach is different, first of all, because it's just straight up a prayer to God. Also, it's important with Misha Berach, by the way, to emphasize refuat hanefesh, refuat haguf, the nefesh part. Like, there could be lots of refuat hanefesh that happens even when someone is dying. Someone could heal him to death, literally. So, but yeah, it's true that we can pray for someone without their knowing, but because it must be that changing name is deeper. That's the point. I mean, it's a big challenge when and how to do it. I remember one of I was even debating if I was going to tell you the story, just because it's like probably my worst story. My biggest mistake. One day I want to write a book. You mentioned I wrote books. Sometimes we write books that make us look good. I want to write a book that makes me look bad. Just because, not because I want to look bad, but because we learn most from our mistakes. And I've made a lot of mistakes. I'm sure we all have, but I know that I have. And we make mistakes, but we learn from them, right? We get better from our mistakes. I remember one time, and this just shows this whole issue. I remember sitting in my office one day, and a woman walks into my office crying. "Are you the rabbi?" She says to me. It was all in Hebrew. She says to me, "She's the rabbi." She says, "My son is very sick. He's dying. He's a young man. He has small children. It's so tragic." I said, "Sit down." She says to me, "No, I just have one problem." She says, my rabbi said you must change his name. That's the only thing that left to heal him. So we were told that there's this amazing Kabbalist in Israel who knows how to do it the right way. And we got in touch with that Kabbalist. But he said it cost $10,000, and I don't have $10,000. So it's heartbreaking to hear that, because it's like, who's taking advantage of it? It's so horrible. So I was like, we do change name. Like, I don't know who this guy is, but we could do, we could change his name here. Like, we could do that. And I only charge $5,000. No, I'm joking. God forbid. God forbid. But I was like, I don't know how to reach this rabbi. I don't know who he is, but if you want to change his name, we could help with that. Obviously, there's no charge, and we could help. So she said, yeah, any rabbi could do it? So I don't know. I mean, I guess I was like, well, yeah, technically. So I was like, I'm not a Kabbalist, but especially I was like, ask your rabbi the name, but we could help with it in the hospital. And in fact, we had just had a patient before that who was dying, and they changed his name, and they had gone to Rav Chaim Kanievsky from Bnei Brak. He was also kind of a mystical figure, and he said to them, when you change the name to make it official, you should call the patient up to the Torah. If you can't call the patient, call their child to the Torah, and when they get their aliyah with the new name, that makes it official, like the aliyah. Some say you have to do a whole ceremony with the minions. Some people say just call them by the new name. But he told this family, give them an aliyah with the new name, and then it's official. So I said to the mother, I remember it was a Wednesday. So I said, you know what? We have a Torah here. Could you get a minyan together? She said, yeah, we have a lot. I was like, tomorrow morning, let's do shachrit in the patient's room. I thought this was a brilliant idea. We'll do shachrit in the room, because I saw they were very into prayer. We'll do shachrit in the room, we'll read from the Torah, and we'll give him an aliyah in his bed. I went up, by this time I had gone up to their room, I met them, met the family. The father even says to me, they're all Israeli. He says to me, I'll read. I'll be honored. I'll read from the Torah. I speak Hebrew. I'll do it. We were like, great, this is so exciting. Even the patient, everyone was excited. We're going to give him an aliyah with his new name. So the part of the lesson is to prepare for things, right? Sometimes we think, we've been doing this for a long time. We can just walk into a ceremony and without any preparation. So the next morning, bring up a Torah. We did a shachri, we were praying in the room with him, and the father starts laning. It was Parshat Vayakel. This was a secular Israeli family. Right when they start reading the Parsha, my heart sank. I thought, what did I do? The first Aliyah says, Mechalaleha motu mat. People who violate Shabbat will die. This was a non-observant Israeli family. Understand the words. We called him up for that Aliyah. We gave with the new name. He gets, as the father read that line, everyone in the room starts crying. I was like, this is not worth it. I'm sweating out. I was like, oh, this is a blessing, that everything will be a blessing for you. And I didn't know what to say. Everyone's crying like this is a bad omen. And I mean, I'm not here to tell sad stories, but just the lesson of like, because to me, I was like, if I would have thought ahead and realized the parsha, they didn't ask to get an aliyah from the Torah. That was my idea, my stupid idea. And he died that Shabbos, this patient, and the family thought it was because of the aliyah. So to me, I was like, this whole thing was a mistake. So this is an example of like, first of all, you see how important it can be to some people, and how it can be taken advantage of by some people, and how mistakes can happen. So maybe that's just like what not to do example. So let's start talking a little bit then about like, what does this all mean? And is this all just kind of like mystical stuff, or is there maybe something deeper or more relevant here, especially as we move into the Yamim Naraim now? Interestingly, Rav Moshe Feinstein was asked what about changing a name for someone suffering from mental illness? Right? We've been talking about either a source of tshuva or physical illness, refuat haguf. What if it's mental health? So this is what he wrote in the bottom of the page there. He wrote, V'sha'alu Rabbeinu im yesh inyan lahosiv shem lebachura shektzat mu'revet b'data im liyot shomeret Torah v'mitzvot. She's struggling with her observance, and she's struggling emotionally and mentally. Ve'ezeh shem losiv. V'amar Rabbeinu she'im roim shezeh kamin shigayon etzla. This is a type of mental illness with her. Ulai nechsha k'mo choli v'yesh inyan b'osafat shem. In fact, this is also something to be done for mental health, and also we mentioned for fertility before. So what's this all about? What's a perspective it's not just about the angel of death coming and being confused, which might be part of what it is, but what's another way to look at this? So there's an interesting marsha here on that Gemara Rosh Hashanah that we read, and then I want to show you a Rambam. I'll give you Rabbi Meir's interpretation. We'll tie it back to that Gemara that we started with. And then I'm open to hearing other thoughts. The Maharsha writes as follows. What's going on with this name change? He says, and remember, why? Part of the question is, we have that Gemara that we read, we say 3/5 of it, or 3/4 of it, depending on how you read it, on the holidays. We still keep the Tshuva, Tefillah, Tzedakah. We keep those three aspects of it. But Shinu Hashem, how come that's not? Why don't we say Tzedakah, Tefillah, Tshuva, V'yeshom Shinu Hashem? I guess it's too long, but right, why don't we? Where did that go? And Shinu Makom, like why was that left out of the high holiday liturgy? So he has a suggestion. He says Bezed lo zachar paitan ela elu gimel roeg zera. He only mentions those three. Sheba lekapara al hagezera sheba bishvil chet. Those three are meant to be when we were reacting to our own mistakes, right? We made a mistake, and so somehow we could correct that through prayer and changing our actions, apologizing, whatever is making it right, and giving tzedakah, doing good for the world. We can try to change our mistakes from the past year. But changing the name is not about our mistakes, actually, right? It's not about chet, masha'en kain, shinui Hashem, v'shinui makom. Same thing. Delo bo lishnos hagazera sheba al chet. Those are not coming for things that we are based on our mistakes. The Hashinui Hashem, Misar Yalif. We learned that from Sarah. Sarah hadn't done anything wrong, right? Hashinui Makom mi Avram. Devade lav mishum chet. They didn't do something wrong. Going to the next underline, it says, Miu Shinui Hashem v'shinui Makom lo matzui lo kmei ella b'mi shegzeiraso b'li chet. This is about someone that something happened to, but it's not their fault. They didn't do something wrong, and they are trying to change something about their life. So this is now a new perspective on this. It's still about changing. It's still about doing something different, but it's not like repentance. That's what makes it different. But it's still about changing ourselves. And so let me show you this Rambam, which I think is just so fascinating, and start to give you some specific examples. And I start to conclude also, but I still do want to hear your thoughts. So the Rambam writes in Hilchos Tshuva, Midarchei tshuva lios hashev soek tamid lifnei Hashem. Part of repentance is to pray constantly to God with bechi, b'tachanunim, v'osei tzedakah. This is familiar, right? Tefillah, with tzedakah, lefi kocho, misrachek harbe min hadavar shechatabo, and to stay away from the things we did wrong. Umishane shmo, and changing the name. What does it mean according to the Rambam? Kolomar, ani acher ve'eni oto ha'ish she'asa otan hamasim. I'm someone else. I'm not that person who did those things. Now, I said it before as though the angel of death or whatever is looking for us, and our name tag has a different name, so he's confused. He's like, oh, wait, I was looking for Yehuda Weiner, not Jason Weiner. So he leaves us alone. But to the Rambam, it's kind of like that, but it's not really like that. It's meaning the angel of death, so to speak, or whatever it is in our lives, that's the negative forces, is not looking for the name, it's looking for those behaviors, that action, that life, that person, and, oh, the way you're living, you're not that person. So you must be someone different. I mean, the best way, it's like, it's not a Band-Aid on tshuva. This is like a complete transformation. My favorite story of this, I told you Rabbi Weiner told me he did it, or not told me, he said that he did this once a week in the hospital. But when he said that, I remembered one story that happened to me, and I thought, because I'm a fraction, and Rabbi Weiner was a really incredible person, but I remembered this story, and I thought maybe this is where he was going with it. I remember I got a call once to see a patient who wanted a Misha Berach before surgery. This is a common name, right? I'm sure everyone has it. You're asked to say Misha Berach. So I went to visit her. As chaplains, we are trained not to just, she asked for Misha Berach, so I walk in, okay, Misha Berach, okay, have a nice day, and then leave, right? No, it's more like, oh, tell me more about what you want to pray for. Is this something that you often turn to in difficult times? What do you have in mind for prayer? Tell me how you're feeling right now. It's more about getting to know the person. We might not even end up saying the Misha Berach, right? It's about really understanding who she is, what she's struggling with. So that's what we did. She tells me all about her struggles with anxiety and self-esteem and finding her place in the world, and also, that she's a lawyer and she's, doing amazing things. And then I was about ready to leave the room. She says, wait, Rabbi, the Misha Berach. I was like, oh yeah, let's say Misha Berach. What's your Hebrew name? She says, oh, I don't have a Hebrew name. I was like, okay, it's fine. We could use your English name. Let's say it was Patricia, something like that. Where there's not like an obvious, or Jason, right? There's not like an obvious Hebrew equivalent. So I said, we could say it like that. She's like, no, I should have a Hebrew name. I'm like, why don't I have a Hebrew name? I want it. Is it possible to pick a name? And I thought, yeah, let's pick a name. And I just spent a half an hour learning about her. So I was like, what, do you have in mind a name? She's like, well, what do you think? What's a name for what I'm going through? And remember, she was going through self-esteem and anxiety struggles and identity struggles. And, and I thought, and she's a lawyer. And that's important to her. Her career is very important to her. And I thought, do you know about Devorah? She said, tell me about her. I said she was one of the judges in Israel. She was one of the great women leaders in the Bible, and she was a judge. She was broke molds, and she was people turned to her for guidance on the national level, and she was like, can I learn more? So I brought her Steinsaltz's biblical personalities or images, whatever it's called, and a Tanakh, and she read about it. Whenever it was, whenever we changed her name, and we did the ceremony in the Madrich, and we gave her Misha Berach with the new name. And why I'm telling the story is because I remember that the surgery didn't go as well as planned. And she asked me to come back the next day or a few days later. And when I visited her, she told me about how the surgery didn't go well. And the doctor came to her and the surgeon said, we had some unexpected complications. We can fix them. It's optional. If you let us, we'll go back in, we'll do it right this time, but we can understand why you wouldn't want to. It's your choice. And she said, I want to tell you about this because my initial reaction was, no way, it's too much for me. I can't handle this. So I'm out. You messed up and I don't want to do it again. And she said, I started saying that and I thought, I'm Devorah. Because at one point the doctor said, Patricia, that's your choice. She said, I'm not Patricia, I'm Devorah. Call me by my name. And she was like, wait, Devorah was strong. Devorah had confidence. I'm Devorah. I want to do it again. And I've been in touch with her again once since then. This was a while ago now, but I remember she was telling me again, and she was like, it's helped me to change how I see myself. I've taken on the persona of Devorah, and I read all about her, everything I could find about her, and I'm like, yeah, I'm Devorah. That's who I am. That's me. I have a new identity because of the name. And the name was an aspect of tshuva. And when you think about it, this is what Rabbi Meir argued in this lecture that I heard on tape, online, but from a tape, that he argued, what was happening with Sarah and Abraham? When they changed their names, they were their mission was being solidified and changed. They were given a new mission, you are now founders and leaders of a nation. And when they're given this, mission to fulfill, they have the new name to fulfill that mission. And as they get the new name, it gave them that certain sense of, okay, now I have a mission. And changing a name can be a sense of having a new mission. And if you go back to the first page, as we begin to conclude, I think you could even argue that the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah on page 1, when we were arguing these 4 or 5 different things, maybe there actually is a theme connecting all of them. Right? If you think about it, the fourth, it was tzedakah, tzaka, shinui Hashem, shinui Maisa, and shinui Makom. Maybe all of them represent changing who we are. A sense of and I'm not saying changing who we are, because it's actually really about coming to touch with who we really are, right? But so it's not changing who we are, but changing from who we don't want to be to who we really do want to be, right? Because think about it, tzedakah. What is tzedakah? I'm a giving person. It's been hard for me to give to others and to share with others. But I'm training myself. I want to be more welcoming and kind and open. And so tzedakah, I'm changing myself. Tzaka, prayer. What is prayer? I mean, obviously we hope that we can have an impact on God or change our future, whatever. But at the essence, prayer is about changing ourselves, right? Prayer is about introspection and thinking about who am I really? It's changing ourselves. It's getting in touch with who we really are, with our core, with our essence. And then, shinui makom. Have you ever found, when you're in a different place, it brings out a different part of your personality or different, sometimes you're just in a place where it's just I don't feel like I'm myself there. It just doesn't work for me when I'm there. But when I'm in this place, it's my happy place, or whatever you call it, that's a place where I feel either the people that I'm around or the physical place, whatever it is, so it's, and then shinui shame. Shinui shame, it's not just about confusing the demons. And by the way, I think that the Hmong practice that we mentioned before, I think also it was something deeper there too. That it's really about taking on a new sense of identity and purpose and mission in life. And so it can really be an actually very transformative and impactful practice. And the truth is, as I've been kind of researching this anew, thinking about this year, and this is why when they asked me, what do you want to talk about, I was just thinking about this topic, and this is kind of a new thing for me in terms of, because I heard that Rabbi Meir lecture, and I heard him say he did it once a week, and I'm just what am I missing by not doing this more often? Obviously, we have to be careful. I told you a story to be cautionary, and there are risks involved, obviously, right? It's not like we're changing names willy-nilly, as they say, but maybe there's a power also, a transformative power in recognizing the potential in embracing a new name, a new aspect of ourselves, So I think that this is something this is why I want to share this, because I think it's relevant I felt like I have something to share about my experience in the hospital, but I think it's relevant well beyond the hospital. I mean, we all deal with people who are sick and suffering, but it's relevant beyond that, because as we're thinking at this time of year, going into the high holidays, about who do I want to be in the new year? How do I want to embrace my true self? The name could really be a very powerful potential for reflecting on that issue. So I hope it's helpful. I think we're actually technically out of time. If there's anyone who wants to share something, I'd love to hear it. Otherwise, I'm happy to just talk after, but I hope this is helpful to you as you prepare for gathering the Sorry that everyone I thought I had 5 more minutes.
Take a bio break, but if you want to share anything with anyone? Questions, comments?
Thank you. Yeah.
I just want to say thank you for this presentation today, especially with the Rambam to change the name. I was looking at those two, change the name to say as if. And I was thinking initially, I think that you have to change your behavior and then change the name, as which comes first.
Right, interesting.
And I can really see that can itself be a discussion.
Right.
But you've made a great case for changing the name can actually be the first thing,
right,
which then creates that possibility of living into that name.
Right.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. Good to see you. Yeah.
The thing I'll add to what I've been thinking about has been just
Just a reminder, one thing, so this session please.
To introduce you, even though it's not, you don't really need a whole lot of introduction. Welcome everyone, welcome, welcome. Melissa, will you close the door? Woohoo, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, beautiful. Friends, it is an honor and a privilege as always to get to study with Rabbi Dr. Aryeh Cohen. He's a professor of rabbinic literature and former chair of the rabbinics department at Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies. Dr. Cohen has created and taught much of the courses of the rabbinics curriculum over the more than 2 decades of his affiliation with the Ziegler School. His research and scholarship sit at the intersection of Talmud, Jewish ethics, and social justice activism. I would say to you, amongst his amazing credits is really he's a social justice giant in Los Angeles, and he keeps being a role model for what it means to live your Jewish values, live, walk, and breathe them each and every day. So it is truly an honor to sit at your feet and learn from you today.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for that really nice introduction. Only part of it I wrote. Okay, so what I wanted to do is, I was asked what part of the liturgy I wanted to talk about, and the first thing that immediately came to mind was Emet Ma'neh, which is sometimes called Mari Kohen, which is a piyut that is in the Ashkenazi rite, though actually on the wonderful website piyut.org, or Introduction to Piyut from Hebrew University, they have one Kafkazi, Jews from the Caucasus Mountain recording, but that's it's a Yotzei Min HaKlal, right? That's an exception. It's mainly an Ashkenazi prayer, but I think that there's such power and beauty in it, and they say here, we're going to talk about aesthetics, joy, and democracy. Maybe. It seems to be the 3 words that came to mind when I was writing that slide. So there we go. Okay. But I like the picture anyway. Okay. So what can people tell me about these verses? וידבר אליי משה אחרי מות שני בני אהרון בקרבתם לפני הנביא ימותו. ויאמר אליי משה דבר אל אהרון אחיך ואל יבוא בכל עת אל הקודש מבית הפרוכת על פני הכפורת אשר על הארון לא ימות כי בענן יראה על הכפורת. What can you tell me about those verses?
I'm not sure what you're looking for. Can you sharpen the question, or you just wanted to say any reaction we have? Or?
Reaction. What's the context of them? What's the connection? What do you see there?
One thing, my associative mind, Bekorvechem, right? Obviously the word korban, they had the right intention, and then it happened what happened, right?
Good. So this is a very great. So whether we have an overlay of disaster or tragedy on the notion of korban as karev, right? Fox in his translation is always insistent on translating korban as a bringing near, as opposed to a sacrifice, which is not, because the sacrifice is a zebach or lad or shlamim, but it's not. But the korban is, so when they brought close, so the 2 children of Aaron came close, right, and then they died, right? They got caught up in the machinery of sacrifice, of the Mishkan. Other things.
Seems that the verses are making a distinction between Dibur and Amirah, because it feels like it could have been almost in one sentence almost. We know that from the first sentence that God's speaking to Moses, so why does it need to repeat? So there must be something different between a Dibur and an Amirah.
Good. Okay, now that's something that the Midrash likes to talk about, the distinction between a Dibur and an Amirah, or like most of the time, God is the Midaber, but here it's Moshe who's Midaber. We know that relationship between Moshe, God, and Aaron, right, that you will be Elohim LeFaro, and Aaron will be your prophet. So there is that relationship between, so that's the Dibur relationship. What's this, everybody knows, what's this, just to mention, what is this leading into?
This is the Kriyah for Yom Kippur.
It is the Kriyah for Yom Kippur, but what comes after?
Well,
Why is it the Kriya ritual?
All the rituals.
Right. So it is the cleansing ritual. Right. This is the cleansing ritual, which then became the annual temple ritual for Yom Kippur. But here it was the cleansing ritual because of seemingly framed by the Korbatam Lefnei Rabbi Amutu, because the children of Aaron came and they were killed. What do we have here? What kind of an introduction is this? How would you characterize this as an introduction to the cleansing ritual? Yeah.
Well, it seems like it's a warning about how powerful it is, but what then immediately jumps out is that we know that he does. Like, Yom Kippur is the only time he does go in. So why does it start by saying, don't go in, but then later it's going to say, I believe, this is how you go in.
Okay, good. So we have here, so first of all, it's very stark that it says twice, you will die, right? Or you can, right? After the two children of Aaron died, and then the Moshe says to Aaron, be careful, follow this choreography to the letter, or else lest you die, right? So that you don't die. And do you remember Rashi's comment on this? Right, Rashi comments, this is like a doctor who tells his patient, take this medicine, but it has a little more oomph. I don't think that's Rashi's exact words. If the doctor says, if you don't take this medicine, you're going to die, like Joe, who didn't take the medicine and died. Right? So that's, yeah.
Yeah, but when we take medicine, we take it at certain times. Aryeh always called it. Time it's everything. Don't tell Aaron, don't go whenever, because that's the Mechoreh. And
right. So like medicine, you don't I don't want to push this analogy too far, but like medicine, you don't take, I take Lipitor now, which, as I understand it, means that I don't have to eat well or exercise ever. But I only take it once a day, because if I take it all the time, then it's not going to be.
You have to take it 3 times a day, or two.
Or if, but that's not so. So that, in that way, it's parallel, right? So, Al Yavo B'chol Eid Elad Chodesh. Right, do not go. You can't go every time. It is, and there's a very, as we remember from the we read it every year, that there's a very specific and strict choreography of what's going to happen, and it's framed by this: be careful, you're going to die. So it's not really a celebratory thing that Moshe is telling Aaron. Moshe is telling Aaron, you're going on a very dangerous mission, right? And know that you have to follow the instructions very carefully. And that notion is this. So Mishnah Yoma, now we're jumping over to Mishnah Yoma. Mishnah Yoma starts out with a very similar kind of thing, a separation out. Shivat Yemei Kodei Yom Kippurim, 7 days before Yom Kippurim, the Kohen Gadol is separated out from his house to the Lishkat Palhedrin. That's it, just as an aside. Palhedrin only appears here. It's not in Midot, where they note all the different offices, but the Lishkat Palhedrin, he's taken there, and Matkinin lo Kohen acher tachtav shema Rabbi Usul, and they set up another Kohen in his place, lest they find out, on the day of that he needs that there's something wrong and he needs an understudy. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Afi Shachar Matkinin lo shema tamut ishto. You should get another wife. Should set up another wife because a Kohen Gadol has to be married because his wife might die. It says he has to have a bayit. They didn't say, don't worry about it. They said, well, yeah, it's a good idea, but then you'd have to line up 100 women because you don't know how many of them are going to die. And then he has to learn that choreography. That's what the Kohen Gadol does during all the 7 days before Yom Kippur, right? He's already the dam, he splashes the blood and offers the spices, and he does the candle, makriv to rosh with the ragel, and he offers and sacrifices the head and the foot. And other days, if he wants to bring the sacrifice, he can. Because the Kohen Gadol gets first in line in order to. So the Kohen Gadol is being put through his paces. Right? So as an aside, right, this is a rabbinic fantasy because there was no way that they let the rabbis into the temple to tell the Kohen Gadol what to do. The Kohanim knew very well what to do, and they did that, but in the rabbinic mind, somebody had to make sure that the Kohen Gadol knew what to do. Why? Otherwise he's going to die. Right? That's the shadow over this whole thing. And then finally, Mishnah Hay, Misaru Ziknei Beitin Ziknei Kuna, so the elders of the court passed him over to the elders of the priesthood. They brought him up to this place that was on the northern end of the temple, according to Josephus. And they adjured him, and then they separated out and they went away. This is what they said to him. Ishi Kohen Gadol, Sir, High Priest. We are the agents of the court. And you are our agent and the agents of the court. We adjure you in the name of the one who rests in this, whose name dwells in this house, that you shall not change anything from what we told you. And then they both separate in tears. Why do they separate in tears?
They may not see each other.
Okay, so the traditional commentaries say it's because, and the Gemara is the part of that, says that he cries because they suspected him of not being a prushi, but being, a sectarian who does the service differently, and they said they cried because they had to suspect him of being sectarian. There's later on in Gemara Yuma, there's a story about a sectarian. The difference between the sectarians and the Prushim, on this, there was like 2 inches. Whether or not you light the incense outside the parochet in front of the aron, outside the curtain in front of the ark, or inside. But there was a story about the Prushim, about a sectarian who did it wrong, who did it not according to the way that the rabbis wanted him to do it, and he died after coming out of the temple. But actually, there's no reason necessarily to think that that's what this is talking about. And could be because they're worried that he might die, right? Because that happened a lot, apparently, in the second temple, that Kohanim, high priests who were not worthy, did the avodah, and they died, and that's why he had a belt around his waist to be pulled out. Another thing that a student of mine suggested years ago was that it was just the stress of the moment. Right after this, he is given his commission. He is going to go in and be the only person who meets God. And he goes into the Holy of Holies, and this is the only person who does this. And the height, of that ma'amad, of that moment, was so great that that's what brought on the tears, right? It was tears crying from that stress. So then he does the whole avodah. So now we're going to skip all the avodah, and we go to Perek Zayin, which is just at the end, it's a little bit after this, but this is the end. He goes through this Mishnayot, the Prakim Bet through Zayin, is the details of what he does during the service and the amount of times. And if you do the Avodah service on Yom Kippur, you know the amount of times he changes clothes and goes to the mikveh and slaughters, and he has to slaughter his korban, his sacrifice, the sacrifice of the people, and the sacrifice of, and then he has to throw the blood, and he has to get it specifically in a specific place, and then goes out and says the name of God, all that stuff. Now this is the end. So he sanctifies his hands and his feet, and he goes and he takes off the clothes, and he goes down and he goes into the mikveh, and he dips, and he comes up, and he dries off. They bring him the white clothes, and they come out and he gets dressed. And once again, he washes his hands and his feet. Nichnas lehotzia tekaf et hamachta. He goes in to take out the incense that's on the kaf, the shovel, and the machta, which is where you get the ashes out. Kidesh Davar Aglav, once again, he sanctifies his hands in the Davar Aglav, with Fashat Yerab Taval, his hands and his feet, he goes down, he dips, Alav Nestapeh, gets up and he dries off. If you love Bigdei Sahab, he puts on the golden clothes of Lavash, and he wears them with Kidesh Davar Aglav, and he, once again, sanctifies his hands and his feet. Nichnas Laktir Torah Shabbat Rabbi Malativ Hanirot, he goes in, he lights the incense of the afternoon, Ben Arbayim, twilight, and he sets up the candles. And once again, he sacrifices his hands and his feet. He takes off the Bigdei Zahav, Bigdei Atzmo B'Lavash. So this is the sign that it's the end. He puts on his own clothes, and they bring him his own clothes that he washes. And then all the priests take him, go with him to his house. They accompany him to his house. Right? And that's the really important, that's the really interesting thing. They make a holiday for him, on Yom Kippur. They make a Yom Tov for him. Why? Because he exited in peace, meaning whole, healthy, and alive from the sanctum, right? From the sanctum. Right? And that, if we go back to the beginning, remember that this whole thing has the shadow of death over it, and he does this detailed choreographed thing, and then finally he finishes, and that's why Yom Tov Hayasa, and then he would make a holiday, and that's what this
feature next to that. Why do we make our pillow the shape of a cube?
I thought I fixed this.
I'll tell you.
Did it? Okay, so it's that major chord march, it's not really a march, but the joyous song is the relief that comes out of, they took him to his house and they made a mishter, right? So for me, that's always signaled that. In other words, this emet manedar, right? And what do the words mean? Emet manedar kohen gadol. How beautiful was the high priest when he exited the Kodesh Kodeshim in peace without any damage. Right? So this is this notion of the Kohen Gadol coming out in harmony, in wholeness, was also reflective of the fact that it worked. Right? The temple service worked. So now the question is, where does this notion come from? That we tie everything to this idea of the Kohen Gadol shining and being beautiful when he comes out of the service. So this goes back to nope. Okay. So the first idea that we have of this kind of glorifying the high priest's work in the temple on Yom Kippur goes back to the book of Ben Sira. Ben Sira is the 2nd century before the Common Era, known to the rabbis, though the rabbis had a very kind of conflicted relationship with Ben Sira, right? But they quote him. Sometimes, and sometimes they quote him in order to contradict him. But he's in the Gemara, so we know that the rabbis knew Ben Sira. But Ben Sira, and this was in the time of the Beit HaMikdash, the time of the temple was still standing. Was glorified and tied his whole Judaism around to a certain extent. Shimon ben Yochanan HaKohen, who was the high priest in his time, and he starts in the 50th chapter of the book of Ben Sira, He starts, Gadol Achav b'Tiferet Amo, Shimon ben Yochanan Cohen, the greatest of his brethren and the glory of his people was Shimon ben Yochanan Cohen. Asher b'Doro nifkad Chabayet b'Yamav Kuzak Heichal. In his generation, the house was repaired, perhaps, and in whose days the temple was fortified. Unclear what nifkad actually means. Repaired because the temple was built before then, but he probably made it better. He brought in more member families. Okay, so then he goes down, and starting in Pasuk Hey, with verse 5 of that chapter, he starts talking about the Cohen. How great now that Man Nehedar is the same Man Nehedar that we saw before in Mariah Cohen. But how great was he, or how glorious was he when he left, when he came forth from the tent, and when he came out from the house of the veil, meaning from the Kodesh HaKodeshim. K'chochav or, and then we start with the analogies. K'chochav or mibein avim u'chyareach malei b'mei moed. The morning star from amid the clouds, as the full moon in the days of the solemn feast. Moed here, I don't know what necessarily the solemn feast, but all the Yemei Moed are in full moons, so it could be whatever holiday we want. Kishemesh mishakeret el heichal hamelach ukekeshet nirata be'anan, the sun dawning upon the temple of the king, and as rainbows seen in the clouds. Right, so here we have these natural metaphors of the year, all kind of beautiful metaphors of beauty around the Kohen. Kineit Spanakto b'mei moed u'kashoshana b'mei mayim k'perach lebanon b'mei kayetz u'ka'esh lebona al minchad, budding branch in the days of the solemn feast, and as the lotus by the watercourse, as flowers of Lebanon in the days of summer, and as fire of incense upon the meal offering. More both combination of natural metaphor and also thrown in at the end, the fire of incense upon the meal offering, metaphor taken from the temple itself. As a gold-plated vessel and chalice that is set with pleasant stones, right? So, kinzayet ranan malei gargar, ucheetz shamein marbeh anav. There's a green olive full of berries. There's a wild olive tree with branches full of sap. So now it's interesting. These metaphors are interesting because they're just noting things in nature. Right? They're not contrasts. Right? They're not saying that it's like we have there's a famous Gemara in Bava Metzia about beauty of Rabbi Yochanan and the beauty of Rabbi Yochanan, which is somewhat reminiscent of this, but it's all about contrast. Right there, it's like the pomegranate pits inside a gold vessel at midday, so it's half in shade, half in. Here it's not. Here it's just pick out beautiful things, either in nature or in Eish Lebona al Minchad, fire of incense upon the meal offering, which apparently was known as beautiful, though it's only open to certain people. This is just the way. This is beauty. Now, so that is in the. So that's the forerunner to our piyut, right? Now the difference between this and our piyut is that was during the time of the Beit Mikdash. Right? This we'll talk about a little more, happens in the time when the Beit Mikdash no longer exists. Right? So we have, historically, we have the biblical account of what the temple ritual is going to be like, the tabernacle ritual, the Yom Kippur ritual. We have we have the Ben Sira account. We have the Mishnah account. And now we have the piyut. And we'll get to that. We'll get to what that means. So he starts with Ka'ol and Tach B'Darei Mala Marei Kohen. And so as the tent, meaning kind of the clouds or the Shekhinah, is stretched out in the upper realms, so is and each line ends with Marei Kohen, so is the countenance of the high priest. Right now, Olam Nimtach B'Darei Mala is an interesting metaphor because it's a metaphor that actually we have for Sukkot in the first sugya in Masechet Sukkah. It talks about what is the Sukkah, what are the different things that the Sukkah is like, and one of the opinions is that it is like the Ananei Kavod. right? The Ohel Nimtach B'Yarim is like God's presence above. That is the countenance of like the thunder that goes out from the sparks of the angels, the chayot here, the chayot above. So is the countenance of the Kohen. And this is interesting because it seems it's just like talking about tzitzis, right? The growth of the four corners of the garment, but actually, both in Yechezkel and then also in Brachot, the tzitzit are seen as a meditation tool. That you go from the tzitzit, from the tchelet on the tzitzit, the blue on the tzitzit, to the blue of the ocean, to the blue of the heavens. And the Goldschmidt, at least, and some of the editors of this think that that's actually what the intention is, that encompassing it is what he's talking about with the tzitziot. The rainbow in the clouds, kahod asher hilbish tzur liyitzurim, like the glory that God apparently that God clothed the creatures with, meaning in the Garden of Eden. Like a rose that's set out in a garden. Ginat Chemed is like a garden, garden for pleasure, a pleasure garden. Like a crown that's put on the forehead of the king. Like the love that's on the face of a groom, guitar natun b'tzanif tahor, like the purity that's put on the headband that says tahor. Yoshev seiter lechalot pnei melech, like the one who sits, and this is probably a reference to Shir HaShirim, like the one who sits hidden in order to see the face of the king. All these things are Marei Kohen, are what we see in the face of the high priest. Now the question is, what?
And it's
alphabetic. So that's important. So because it's alphabetic, it doesn't necessarily have any order aside from the alphabet, right? And so the question is, what connects all these things? What kind of metaphors did you hear in these? Right, we start with the Ohel Nimtach, Rakim Yotzim, Livim, Keshet.
I don't know if I followed all of them, but they did seem less nature-oriented than Ben Sira on the whole.
Okay,
I don't know if that's true.
They weren't exclusively nature-oriented. Ben Sira, we had everything that Ben Sira says, so they were pretty much around nature.
Yeah, his were more almost all nature.
Right. Here we have there are another 14 of these.
Yes, that's true.
But they're not. But you're right that they're not definitely not exclusively nature. And there's lots of other things. Yes.
Some of them seem exclusive. I mean, they're all good, obviously, but some of them seem like exclusively good, and some of them seem like tinged with like it's the good thing that's overshadowing something possibly negative.
So there's interesting some more.
So like with the rainbow, like it's a gray sky, whatever, but all of a sudden, right, there's the rainbow. So it's like, oh, but that's nice. But if you're looking compared to the gray, I think the other one that really stood out to me is like it seemed like it was something good coming out of something bad. Well, other ones just seem like exclusively good, like the joy of the crucifixion. Like unless you think he's made a bad match, but like that's just kind of purely good. While the other one seems to be contrasted. When you think about like the tension of the Kohen of like, this could go really great, or this could go really wrong.
Right, and the Anan also is, of course, a sign, right? A sign that God is not going to do anymore that really awful thing that God did beforehand by flooding the world. Yes, what did I say?
Anan.
Right, the Keshed, Anan is that God, the Keshed was put in right out so as a sign that God is not going to do anything was not going to flood the world anymore, so that also stands over there. I also like that. Yeah, the chesed anitan al pnei chatan and the hod asher hilbish tzor leitzri, right? So the what is being compared to is something that itself is only contextualized in a moment, right? The chesed, the love that's on the face of the chatan is not a thing, right? It's just what the chatan is projecting at that moment, and also the hod that we have, which is what the glory of God, right? That God clothed Adam and Chava in the glory of God before the sin. Yeah.
So you said maybe sometimes the Cohen didn't make it out. We have that recorded where it's it didn't work, or he did it wrong.
Well, we have that in the Gemara says. We have that actually in the Gemara in Yoma. It says that that's why they had the.
I understand that was just in case, but did they record and say this Cohen actually died when he?
Oops.
Yeah, because I wonder because all that moment of the tension also makes me think of the whatever priest or whoever it is, patriarch who goes into the tomb for Jesus and they have the fire who brought the matches and they're damn it, I forgot the matches, God, the holy fire. What happens if?
Right. So we don't have any historical evidence of the Kohanim who didn't make it out. So what we do know is that the high priesthood was bought and sold during the Second Temple. We have that from Jesus and from Josephus. Jesus didn't like the temple so much either, probably. But we have that from Josephus, a little bit from Philo, but that the high priesthood became something that was both a political ball that was bought and sold and given for political favors, which is probably how it got to the rabbis, that the high priest then probably died because he couldn't have been worthy. Though we don't have any historical evidence that the high priest died, so therefore we don't have actually any, as opposed to the Crusader, the keynote for the Crusaders, we don't have any keynotes about the high priests who died. Though his family was probably sad. All right, so here we have. So now we have So this is what Maria Cohen. The power of this. It seems to me that as we pointed out, the different types of metaphors that we have. The only theme that goes through them is that they're beyond, right? They're extra. They're not just things that you see every day, like the anan, the keshet, and the anan, the glory that God clothed Adam and Chava. That the Kohen's face, what the Cohen looked like on that day, was so beyond anything else. And this goes back to, of course, when Moshe would come out of Ohel Moed, he had to wear a mask because his face was kind of shining with the glory of God. And this is so at this moment in the service, right, after we do this, comes at the end of the Avodah service. Right, in the Avodah service itself, if you remember, or in the full Piyutim of the Avodah service, it starts at the creation. Right, until it takes a couple of pages until we get to actually the Avodah itself. It's because you have to start creation, and then Israel, and then the tribes, and then the one tribe, and then the Aaron, and then you get to the Avodah, right? And then it goes through the whole Avodah, and then this is the last moment, as we said, because this is the kind of the celebration, the joy of the Avodah service happening. Now, the other side of this, and this is what the democracy side is that when we think back on the historical progression, so Vayikra, there's only one person who knows what's going on Yom Kippur. Right? Aaron. Moshe tells Aaron, Aaron does it. Nobody else is there, which is Aaron and God. The Ben Sira, who's historically done, I don't step there, but Ben Sira talks about what the Kohen looks like when he comes out. But it's still only about the Kohen. The break is Mishnah. right? Because Mishnah was probably written, the number of the Mishnah, probably, there is a theory that Mishnah Yoma and Mishnah Midot were written to recite. So instead of doing the Avodah, the rabbis recited Mishnah Yoma. And so now instead of the Kohen Gadol or just the Kohanim doing it, it was all the rabbis who became the Kohanim in that moment of reciting, instead of doing the Avodah, reciting the Mishnah. And then Piyut becomes this radical break because Piyut was just us. Right? Piyut was just the Chazan, and if you remember the Avodah service, Piyut, the Chazan, and then the Chazan says the name of God. And we all bow down and say the name of God. Not only are we just reciting the what happened, but we are performing what happened. We bring to the Beit Knesset what happened in the Beit Mikdash, and so we all are, well, the Shaliach Tzibur is the Kohen Gadol, and we are all the Kohanim and the Israelites in the Beit Mikdash in our congregation, and this democratizes the whole process because it's not left just to the Kohanim, nor even to the rabbis. It's just everybody. And this is actually one of the reasons that there was a big controversy about Piyut in the Middle Ages. There were a number of reasons. One was the Platonic reason that poets are bad. That's what the Rambam basically, that was the Rambam's basic assumption. But because of the fact that it is taking things that were only supposed to be known by a few people and giving them out to everybody. And so it is the reason that Marei Kohen is such a celebratory piyut, and the reason that it's sung in such a celebratory way is because of the fact that we are the ones who went through the process. It wasn't just the Kohen, right? Inside the Beit Mikdash, it was just the Kohen who went through and survived, and then he went to his house and he had a party because he survived. But nowadays, when we bring the Avodah into the Beit Knesset, so then it is us. We went through it, and we survived, and therefore we sing Marei Kohen, because it is us who did that, and then we are celebrating the fact that we survived. That's what I got. Comments, yes. Reaction.
So, Yasher Co-op. So I have never really been able to wrap my head around the Avodah service, and so I'm working really hard here to figure this out. I'm really not understanding why we do an Avodah service at all. I'm not sure if the joy of getting through it, why we're doing it, why don't we do it in the afternoon when the mood is supposed to start transitioning on Tisha B'Av, when the mood starts transitioning into a little bit more of a joyful mood. Why are we still doing something that's supposed to be so joyful? And we haven't really been doing what maybe the process of Teshuvah is what we've gone through and struggled through. Like, what is it? We didn't really literally do what the Kohen Gadol did, right? Well, and it's still a very personal thing and not a communal thing in some ways, the way this operates. I'm still having a number of issues in a number of different directions, so maybe you can help with any of them.
So I do want to say, of course, that if you feel everything that's supposed to be felt at every moment of the liturgy, that's a very good prescription for mental breakdown. Up and down. Very good prescription for mental breakdown. Right? It's up and down, happy, sad, one after the other. There's lots of different things. So you have on the one hand al-chet, which is personal, even though it's communal, but it's the personal tshuva. You have, and they have on the other hand, in the Musaf, different parts of the Musaf service, but you have in the Chazarah, the Musaf service, which is already, in most synagogues, it's already where you get into the afternoon, or if you're not in the afternoon, depending on how your chazan is doing. But Yom Kippur is a joyous holiday. Right? Lo hayu yamim tovim Yisrael k'tu b'av Yom Kippur. It was one of the two most joyous holidays of the year. There's Tu B'Av, which has now become a love festival, and there's Yom Kippur. And the reason for that is because on Yom Kippur is not about doing tshuva.
Right. That's
the Aseret Yemei Tshuva. Yom Kippur is about performing, having done repentance, being pure. We wear white. We're like the angels. So it is a glorious day. I mean, we're all hungry, but it's it is a glorious day. And so Yom Kippur is happy. Now, it is the culmination of doing tshuva, and we do at other points. We do al-chet. We do all this. We remember this stuff. We do that stuff. We also do Yeshaya, the rabbis stick Yeshaya right in the middle to remind us that everything we're doing is wrong, just because right? But the Avodah service is because this is the moment. It's all about, this is the moment when we meet God. Right? The question of, now, it's very detailed, so you can get lost in that, right? Because it's very detailed, but everything is very detailed, right? The creation of the world is detailed, right? So, what we're doing with the Avodah service is saying that once upon a time, but also now, at this moment, what happens when the rabbis say, what happens, Rabbi Yishmael Kohen Gadol went into the Talmud, went into the Kodesh Kodeshim, and he saw God getting up from the seat of Din and moving over to the seat of mercy. That's what Yom Kippur is, right? It's that moment in which so it's our trying to figure that out. It's and the way, and the vessel with which we have to do that is this Avodah service, right? Is the temple service put into piyut and recited in the Beit Knesset by us.
So is joy really the right emotion that we should be having? I feel like I'm not so sure that is what I really want to feel after all of my teshuvah. I feel like maybe I want to just feel like I'm evolving into a better place, but not feel like I've gotten through a traumatic life. I could have died, and therefore I have some sort of sense of joy that I got through this moment. I want to feel like, no, I didn't just get through a moment. I'm going to be a better person and be in a better place. Well, and I don't know that the Avodah service does the latter, does the former.
I think the Avodah service does the former.
Yeah.
Does the trauma, getting through the trauma to a place of joy. Because I'd suggest that it's because ritual is a momentary, right? You have to build a life. I mean, yes, you're right. But we dress up as if we're dead. We dress up as if we're angels. We dress up in white. We dress up, right? We dress up as to perform purification, right? To perform the fact that we have been redeemed, right? And so that's what liturgy does. Liturgy allows us to see that part of ourselves. And that's joyous. Now, it's also, part of that is getting through this specific process, this specific cauldron of engagement with God. That's not the day-to-day work of doing tshuva, of creating, of being a better person. And there's an interesting Gemara in Rosh Hashanah which talks about, in the Mishnah that talks about when is the world judged. And there are various different opinions, and there's one opinion that says that the world is judged every minute. Right? So the question is, what question is that really an answer to? Right? The question I think that is an answer to is this just one and done? No, this is a process. But that's different than what we're going through in Yom Kippur, which is trying to figure out how we are standing opposite God in this moment of the year where we have a calendrical cycle in which, at various points, on Pesach, we enact liberation. We enact the fact that we can say, this is God. Right? On Sukkot, we enact salvation. Right? That we're going through the desert and being taken care of, and we have the man, and we have the clouds. And on Yom Kippur, we are enacting purification and redemption, that we can be pure. And so, but those are moments. That's not saying that in between those moments we have to do a lot of work. But these are our liturgical moments. Yeah.
I definitely appreciate this, and it reminded me of something my congregants once said at the end of it before. They're like, "Oh, you look so happy to be done." I'm like, "Yeah." It's like there's a lot of joy and relief, like in that moment. But then I'm also wondering, because for me, there was like a lot of tension up until make sure it goes well, so many moving pieces. And getting also that for a lot of liberal Jews and the people that's been moved down, there's been a lot more democracy. But this is high tempo, this is high drama for us. But how do we make sure that the people are also feeling the drama? Like I'm feeling like the Israelites felt the drama and the tension of the Cohen, even though they weren't in the room, obviously, with him. How do we make our people today feel that sense of drama, tension, heighten? How do we bring a little bit more?
So I have a great example of how not to do it.
I asked them to do it.
Somebody brought a goat into the synagogue and then sent it out. That didn't work. It just because everybody just looked at the goat. But I think the way, the part of the way to, it's hard. You have to, first of all, it takes training them, right? Studying beforehand, or taking some time using a good translation of the Avodah service. There is a good translation, which was put out in this journal, Kerem, by blanking on his name, the literature professor from Tufts University. But using a good translation, but also explaining what it is. The fact that the Avodah service, that the PU of the Avodah service start at creation, is to say that just as the temple is the point in the world, the Eben HaShtiyah is the place from which the world was created. Yom Kippur was the day on which the world was created. There is a temporal connection here, right? And the world was created for this specific thing. So there is a way to build up the drama. You don't have to necessarily believe it, right? But this is the drama. This is the day. Right? Zeh hayom harat olam. What does it mean to put yourself in a place where today is the day on which everything depends? And that's an as if. Somebody said the subjunctive is the grammatical syntax of liturgy. Right? It's an as if. And that's, I think, the way to bring people into it. And then there are calls and response. I don't know if you can make them perhaps more accessible. But I think that there is, it has to be. I don't know. It has to be. Nothing has to be. But bringing people understanding that this is the moment. This is it. Why are we? I think that actually, and this is in the conservative Machzor doesn't have this, doesn't have Mari Cohen, which I think is terrible, but it does have all this Yiddish poetry around the Holocaust, which I think is a mistake. I think we're missing the point. It's not Tisha B'Av, right? It's not Tisha B'Av, and also the number of our congregants who actually understand Yiddish poetry is unfortunately minuscule. But it's not Tisha B'Av. We're missing the moment. There's enough drama here in Yom Kippur that we shouldn't have to go to the Holocaust, which is always kind of a trump card. Right? Yes?
I just have one. We also still struggle with doing Seder Avodah, very much so. But Rabbi Joshua Shosky, who's my chazan for the Hagim, and I have started to sing Ishai Ribo's Seder Avodah, which is really beautiful and has the call and response pieces, and is actually laid out in the lovely conservative Mashal Machzor, but it's a way for you to engage people. It's the same call and response over and over again. If you have a band, we don't, but if you have instrumentation, it's even more beautiful. So you should look it up. It's Ishai Ribo Seder Avodah, and if you set it up beautifully, it's a really nice way of, at that point of the day, having something uplifting and connective and participatory for the people to do Seder Avodah.
Yeah, that's good.
It is exactly 12. You're welcome to one more comment, or good job.
Yes, sorry, I'm such a thorn.
No, not at all.
I'm not the rose, I'm the thorn. I'm sorry.
So this is.
Do you have one of these?
You probably, if you know me at all.
So I just wanted to say that this was the only recording of Mari Cohen which wasn't all men.
Yeah.
This is Julia Andelman with Samuel Hadar.
You have all this stuff to send, or
I can if you want.
Okay, so it was beautiful. It was very inspiring. You know what? Other thing you reminded me. You know, Yom Kippur is supposed to be celebratory. Shabbat, Shabbaton, right? You know, and when people strike, you know, people celebrate. You know, it's not like, and I see the parallel.
Shvitat shvitot.
Yeah, but you know, people are supposed to be mourning because they're not working and they're not getting what they deserve. But
it's definitely true.
Instead, it's an expression of hope that we.
But also in that place where we
live together.
I think you're totally right, because in that place where we get together in order to create justice in the world, that's a place of celebration.
Yeah,
even if
exactly,
it's reacting.
That's why we have the Maria Cohen and the Solu Solu Panudares, Yeshayahu, because we need the, you know, to me, Judaism is about the reconcile of ideals and reality.
Yeah.
Because, you know, we have our ideals and then we have reality. And, you know, maybe that's what Yom Kippur is all about. But you know, and